Dhamma. Good morning and welcome to the Sunday service. Happy Mother's Day for everybody, all around the mothers. And this morning we're going to meditate few minutes. Then after that, Subodha is going to give a Dhamma talk. So right now, Subodha, you can start meditation.
Thank you, Bhante. All right, let's get into a comfortable position. We can close our eyes, put our hands in our lap, and take 3 deep breaths. And then think thoughts of metta, goodwill, beginning with yourself. This is a sincere wish, a wholesome desire for your own happiness, your true happiness. You might think to yourself, may I be happy, may I be peaceful, may I be free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May I live with heart and mind unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May I look after myself with ease. And extend your goodwill to your loved ones, your mother, your father, your family, your friends, your mentors, all those near and dear to your heart, and all those that you find easy to respect and admire. May they be happy. May they be peaceful. May they be free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May they live with hearts and minds unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May they look after themselves with ease. And extend your metta to your acquaintances, those that you don't know so well. For them too, may they be happy. May they be peaceful. May they be free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May they live with hearts and minds unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May they look after themselves with ease. And also generate thoughts of goodwill for those that you find difficult to get along with, those that you find difficult to respect or admire, even those that may call you enemy. For them too, we wish that they be happy, that they be peaceful, that they be free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May they live with hearts and minds unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May they look after themselves with ease. And now extend your metta, your goodwill, your loving kindness in all directions. To the north, to the east, to the south, to the west, above and below. To all sentient beings everywhere. May we all be happy. May we all be peaceful. May we all be free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May we all live with hearts and minds unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May we all look after ourselves with ease and happiness. And now let us settle into our breath. Ardent, alert, and mindful, setting aside greed and distress with reference to the world, we bring our attention right here to the body. When we breathe in, when we breathe out, we locate where we feel the breath most strongly in our body and settle there. Becoming familiar with the breath, knowing when it's long, knowing when it's short, knowing when it's deep or shallow. And we learn how to breathe in a way that settles the body, in a way that settles our bodily fabrications, breathing in a way that brings us right here to this present moment, to this place and this time. We can breathe in a way that gladdens the mind. Breathe in a way that makes this a pleasant place to be, so that we need not go out and look for anything else outside of ourselves. And our mind need not search into our past, into our future, or get caught up in fantasies. But that the mind can abide right here, right now. So settle into this moment, continue watching your breath, being aware of your breath, seeing how you're breathing, and make this a comfortable place to stay. Continue to meditate this way until you hear the bell.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Subodha, leading the meditation. Right now, you can start your Dhamma talk.
Thank you, Bhante. I pay homage to the Buddha. I pay homage to the Dhamma. I pay homage to the Sangha. Today is Mother's Day, and it seems like most people today are celebrating the day, being with their mothers, being with their spouses who may be mothers, being with family in general, perhaps even being with friends. And all of that is appropriate and good. I would like to think that today many people are, at least here in the United States, generating a lot of goodwill for their family and for their friends and for their loved ones. And so it's on the topic of goodwill that I'd like to talk about today. Earlier this week, I was watching someone present on a paper they had written. And this paper was on a practice that is mostly observed in Mahayana Buddhism, a kind of ritual. Something along the lines of the life release ritual. I think in Chinese it might be called Fang Shen, I might be wrong. But the idea is that one can generate a lot of good merit and good karma by releasing animals from captivity. And in the most extreme cases, they're freeing animals that might have been used for slaughter. But in the more mild cases, they're just freeing these animals from captivity in general. And in this person's paper, they were talking about how this practice is typically done, the kind of animals that are often released. And this person also touched upon how there are some criticisms around this practice, this ritual, because of the amount of animals that might be released at a time, the kind of animals that are released and where they're released into. So there are some ethical and environmental concerns. One example of this was a couple of Taiwanese Buddhists who, while visiting the UK, wanted to do one of these big life release rituals. So they chartered 3 ships and got a lot of other Buddhists to come with them. And they had these crates full of crustaceans. So from the pictures, it looked like they might have been crabs or lobsters or something along those lines. But they went off the coast. I can't remember what part of the UK they were at, but they went off the coast, went into the ocean, and dumped these crates into the ocean. How joyous, how wonderful, how amazing that they're freeing all these animals from captivity. Might have been eaten because a lot of people find lobsters and crabs delicious, and they've done their good deed. Only to come back to shore and find out that they're in violation of a particular environmental act from the 1980s in the UK, and now they have to pay thousands of pounds, and also all of those crustaceans they released, they now have to try to capture again and get them out of there because they were invasive. They were not local to the area and could have done terrible damage to the environment there, as well as also possibly died or affected other animals in the area. And there are a lot of cases like that, these ethical concerns. Other places where it's been commodified, it's big business now. You have people that have this business of capturing birds, these little traps that they lay out for them, and then they capture the birds, put them in cages, and then so people walking around, perhaps a garden or a park, can see the cage and see the vendor there, pay a fee, take one of the birds and free it. Right? And there's all these concerns that were brought up in the paper. And the person who wrote the paper did admit that, hey, this practice probably doesn't come from Buddhism. Most scholars agree that it did start in China, and it's either of Taoist origin or indigenous Chinese origin, something along those lines. And the person said this during their presentation. But then afterward, someone in the audience asked, hey, you've been talking about, Mahayana practicing this. Well, why don't they practice this in Theravada countries? Now, the problem with the question is that the question itself is actually wrong, because this practice is also done in Theravadan countries now, but it's also the same issue, the same origin, that it comes from China and probably is from Taoist or indigenous Chinese origin. But this person asked the presenter, and the presenter, in the heat of the moment, answering this question, took all the research they had done in their paper and let it dribble out their ear and said something else, which is something I hear far too often. Well, I think we do this wholesome and wonderful act because we as Mahayanists have the Bodhisattva ideal. And we're not just practicing for ourselves, we're practicing for the benefit of all beings. And so we do these kind of rituals to help alleviate the suffering of others. Theravadan Buddhists are only in it for themselves. They only practice for their own release, they only practice meditation, cultivate their own minds, and they're not so interested in doing things for others. And I couldn't believe this answer. In fact, I was quite disheartened by this answer. And this wasn't an academic setting, but I was also the only Theravadan Buddhist there. So in this academic setting, this very sectarian view was thrown out there, and the rest of the Mahayanists in the room nodded along like, yes, that's correct. And I'm there shaking my head. No. Because there is no one Buddhist tradition that has a monopoly on compassion. But it is often the case in certain traditions that's exactly what they're told, that they have some kind of monopoly on compassion, whereas other traditions don't. And I can see sometimes why people might come to this conclusion if they only partially read or they only selectively read of various canons. I'm especially reminded of this one sutta, this one story out of the canon, the Pali canon, where there are two acrobats, one acrobat and the assistant acrobat. And they're planning out their routine for the day. They have these elaborate things they do with their acrobatic skill. There's this pole they climb and doing all these other things. And the acrobat turns to his assistant and says, all right, here's what we're going to do today. I'm going to look after you, watch out after you, and you're going to watch out after me. And by me watching out for you and you watching out for me, we're going to cover all of our bases, show off our amazing skills, make lots of money, and today will be a success. And his assistant, who for some reasons her name is Frying Pan, we're not really told why her name is Frying Pan, but that's her name, she turns to her master in this sort of apprentice situation and says, actually I think we're going to be better off if I look after and watch after myself, and you look after and watch after yourself. That way we'll have our bases covered, we'll be able to show off our skill, we'll make lots of money, and today will be a success. And the Buddha says, in that particular instance, in that example, the assistant was correct. And if the story stops there, if the lesson stops there, then it does seem to paint the case that in Theravada, the Buddha is saying that no. People are looking after other people. That's wrong. No. You just look after number one over here and you'll be fine. But that's not what the Buddha says. He says that example is correct, but the reason why is because he looked at it this way. At the very bottom of his list of 4, you have the kind of person that is not doing anything with themselves or others in mind. Just kind of destructive all the way around. They're not watching after themselves, not trying to protect themselves, and they're not watching out or trying to protect others. Then you have the kind of person who is only watching out for others and not watching out for themselves. And that person is actually lower than the example we see in the story of the acrobats, which is the person who looks out for himself. Now again, not in the worldly kind of way. It's not like kind of Wolf of Wall Street, kind of nonsense here, the kind of person who's greedy and selfish. No, rather, the kind of person who's cultivating for oneself is still better than the person who's only cultivating for others with no regard for oneself. But then the Buddha points out that the number one person, the person that he respects the most, the person who's at the top of his list, is the person who practices watching out for themselves and watching out for others. In fact, that's what he ends up saying at the end of this sutta on the acrobats. He then says, talking to his monks, when establishing mindfulness, do so with the thought, I will watch after myself. And when establishing your mindfulness, do it with the thought, I will watch out for others. And then he says again, when watching out for oneself, when practicing and cultivating for oneself, one is doing so for others. And when one is doing so for others, one is doing so for oneself. And that's the kind of thing that we find in the Pali Canon. But I still think that the priority does begin with oneself. It's the same thing when we sit here and meditate and we're developing our metta, our loving kindness, our goodwill. We begin with ourselves. And as we look at the Eightfold Path and what we're cultivating, it is also about ourselves, what we're doing, what our actions are. But that's because, I truly believe this, the Buddha recognized that you can't pour from an empty cup. You can't pour from an empty vessel. And if you don't take care of yourself, and you're not established in goodwill, you're probably not going to be very effective in taking care of others. One of the things that we cultivate in the Eightfold Path is our wisdom, is our discernment, is our panya. And we can see what happens with compassion when we don't have any wisdom. We might do stuff like releasing a bunch of invasive species into a pond or a lake or a river they don't belong, and end up doing irrevocable damage, let's say. Or we might find a person who is making a business out of these charitable, meritorious acts. And then you wonder what supporting that business might actually be doing in the long run. So we're developing wisdom and we're developing qualities in ourselves. The Buddha even says in that same sutta on the acrobats that when we're cultivating in such a way that we're looking after our own path, looking at what we're developing in our minds. And he says that's how you take care of yourself, as you're cultivating in the Eightfold Path. And then he poses the question again, and then how do you take care of others? And he says that one of the ways you take care of others is by establishing yourself in goodwill. That's one of the ways that you take care of others. And so we see something that goes all the way back to the Pali Canon with this very practice of developing for oneself, for one's own benefit, for one's own protection, and developing for the sake of others and their protection as well. Since it's Mother's Day, we can also look at another very famous sutta, which is the Karaniya Metta Sutta. And that one, there's a particular passage that people really, really like because it involves mothers, and it's a very evocative image, and I'm going to read it just so that we have the appropriate flavor without my own, let's say, exposition on it. So the Buddha tells us to think, happy, at rest. May all beings be happy at heart. Whatever beings there may be, weak or strong, without exception, long, large, middling, short, subtle, gross, seen and unseen, living near and far away, born or seeking birth. May all beings be happy at heart. Let no one deceive another or despise anyone anywhere, or through anger or resistance, perception, wish for another to suffer. As a mother would risk her life to protect her child, her only child, even so should one cultivate the heart limitlessly with regard to all beings. With goodwill for the entire cosmos, cultivate the heart limitlessly, above, below, and all around, unobstructed, without hostility or hate. Whether standing, walking, sitting, or lying down, as long as one has banished torpor, one should be resolved on this mindfulness. This is called a Brahma abiding here, not taken with views, but virtuous and consummate in vision, having subdued greed for sensuality, one never again will lie in the womb. And the part in question here that I want to focus on is the idea of protecting as a mother would. This is such a powerful and evocative image. You know, we know it and see it, we recognize it. I know that I do. Last week, my wife sprained her foot, not even her ankle, her foot, in like the middle of the foot. She sprained it in this way that is like 1% of all sprains, maybe less. She managed to do this really weird thing that hardly anyone ever does to their foot. But she ended up doing it Saturday night, and she woke up Sunday morning, and I told her, like, okay, well, we'll see how this goes, but we might end up having to go to the ER to make sure everything's okay. And so last week, after I led the meditation service early in the morning from 9:30 to 10:30, I ended up taking off right after that to go back to my wife and take her to the ER. And so we ended up being in the ER the entire rest of the day. My wife was sitting there right next to me in a wheelchair because she was having difficulty walking, as you can understand. And I was furiously studying for my Sanskrit final that was going to take place the very next day. So I'm practicing my Sanskrit. She's sitting next to me bored, and she decides she wants to practice her Sanskrit too, even though she's never studied. So she's in chapter 1. Oh, gachami. Yes, I go. Very good, wife. What are Sandhi rules? You don't want to know. And so I'm going through the lessons with her. But while we were there, we were seeing a lot of other people. You know, again, we were there for a long time because everyone was there for a long time. They didn't have enough people on staff that day. They couldn't have possibly known there were going to be that many people in the ER that day. And the room was just full of people. But it wasn't just adults that were in need of the services there. There were also children. Some of them teens, some of them young, maybe 7, maybe 5. But there were also even small children, toddlers, maybe 1 or 2 years old, who were there. Young, so young, they couldn't possibly even know what was wrong with them or why they were there. They were just suffering. And I did see that image. There's this mother holding her child. Her child is feeling so out of sorts, feeling so unwell with whatever's wrong with it, that the child isn't even crying out. It's just there limp in the mother's arms and just staring into space. You can only imagine what was wrong with that child. But that child was there. And the mother is holding that child, and I can see the concern in the mother's face. A mother's job is to protect her children, and she's gotten to the point where she can't protect the child anymore. There's nothing for her to do. She's there at the hospital so that hopefully doctors can help her in protecting her child. And so there she is, holding tightly to her child and looking for help. So that is an evocative image. But I do think that one of the ways we approach this passage in the suttas is perhaps misguided, at least the way we interpret it in the West, but it might also be the way a lot of people interpret it. I'm not sure. Because there are a lot of people who don't study Pali very much, and then they read passages like that translated in whatever language, and they tend to think that our job is to protect every single person and every sentient being in the world as if they were our only child. As if we're the mother sitting in the ER, and every single person in the world is that child we're holding on to like that. In the tradition that I practice, the emphasis is a little different. But the emphasis is there differently for, I think, a very special and important reason. When we read the passage carefully, what we realize what we're protecting in that way is not the whole world and every being in it. We're protecting our goodwill. That's what we're protecting. And the reason why we're protecting our goodwill is because the world often is not supportive of our goodwill. We're trying to live lives without any animosity, without any sense of ill will for any being anywhere. And the world tends to chip away at our goodwill and let ill will take root and flourish. And so we protect our goodwill because protecting our goodwill is how we develop our goodwill in a limitless way. It's how we develop a limitless heart. And that's the way that we can protect ourselves and others. Because we can't really ensure the safety and protection of others unless we develop our heart limitlessly. And so we protect our goodwill. And so for myself, going onward in the practice, when I think about what it means to protect my goodwill, to protect my heart so that it can become limitless, I'm going to think of that mother sitting there in the ER, holding her limp child in her arms, wanting to protect that child. That's what we're protecting. We're protecting our own hearts so that we can practice in such a way that it becomes limitless. Our goodwill becomes limitless. Our compassion becomes limitless. Our empathetic joy becomes limitless. And our equanimity, our ability to adapt to our environment and to have patience for situations that we can't change, also becomes limitless. And as we develop in the path and grow in our discernment, grow in our disenchantment and dispassion, as we grow into awakened beings, however long that may take, our heart truly becomes limitless in every way. We become beyond limit and we become beyond definition. That's what we're trying to do. And that means that that limitless heart full of goodwill is part of the path, part of the practice, and not something that's just done for ourselves, but also not done in a way that disregards ourself, our own safety, our own happiness, our own sense of protection. It's something that we do in both ways. We see that in the story of the acrobats. That when we go past the lesson of those two, we settle on something that's even deeper and more profound. That as we are establishing our mindfulness, we do so with the full intent to watch out for ourselves. And we do so with the full intent to watch out for others. And that protection that we want to offer others, that safety in harmless living that we're developing, begins by protecting our hearts. We protect our hearts through the practice. When we look at the Eightfold Path, what we're developing is a way that makes it easier to cultivate that kind of heart. And that phrase that I keep coming back to again, circling, limitless, is because that's what it means. When the Buddha talks about unobstructed, he means that we have cleared our minds and our hearts in such a way that we can have that goodwill for every single person we interact with. And that's one of the measures that we can have for ourselves. As we go about our daily lives, as we interact with people, can we truly say that we hold no animosity, no ill will, that we truly wish for their real and lasting happiness, every single person? That's what it means to be limitless in that regard. And that is truly wise. But that's not the kind of thing that any one tradition has over the other. This limitless heart that we're cultivating is actually something that extends beyond traditions. There are many things that we can look at amongst the various Buddhist schools in terms of doctrine, in terms of practice, that we can argue about. We can have that discussion. But no tradition has a monopoly on compassion. We're all developing compassion. And it's one of the things that actually unites us as Buddhists of different traditions in the world. We're all practicing goodwill. We're all practicing compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity, amongst everything else. So, circling back to that person who was giving that presentation, we're all looking for ways to actually practice our goodwill in the world. This ritual that people have come up with, regardless of its origin, is one of the ways that people have tried to do it. Perhaps it's not the best way. But it's Mother's Day, and people are practicing in a different way. People are trying to practice their goodwill for their mothers, which is a pretty good start. You practice goodwill for yourself, and then the very step after that is looking at your loved ones, your family, your friends, your mentors. And so on this day, not all of us might have our mothers around. We might not see our mothers today due to distance or circumstance, whatever the case may be. But we are interacting with each other, which means that we can share that same goodwill for others, and by doing so, honor the people that we respect and admire, including our mothers. So I think that that's the kind of stuff I would like to share today on Mother's Day. May it be of benefit to the small group of us that are here today, but may it also be of benefit to anyone who listens to these words in the future as you think about what it means to have an unlimited heart and what it means to protect and cultivate it.
you know how successful those people were at collecting their crustaceans again?
Well, I think what essentially happened is because they were invasive, whatever it's not. I don't know what it would. I don't know what governing body it is that looks after the coasts in the UK. I don't think it's the Coast Guard, but maybe. But whatever governing body basically put a hit out on all those crustaceans that those monks released. These were monks from Taiwan. So they released all these crustaceans who now for sure there was like an all points bulletin out there like, hey, start grabbing these guys as quick as you can. So a bunch of fishermen and came in there and tried to clear them all out, and the cycle just continued.
I have the image of herding cats as defining hoarding your crustaceans back.
Yeah, yeah, and these guests from Taiwan ended up having to pay something like 180 something pounds or something like that. I can't remember the exact amount. It was a lot. It was a lot. Maybe less, but it was a big number, a surprising number.
180,000 pounds, then that would be a big number.
Yeah. But yeah, whatever amount they had to pay is a lot. But yeah, it's interesting to see these kind of practices. These practices can be done in a skillful way, I think. I think the scale has to be much smaller and done with a lot of planning. For example, this practice is also done in Tibet, where I think it's also maybe done in Nepal as well, but they try to protect cattle over there, cows, from any kind of slaughter. And so when they do save them, what they do is they tie a little ribbon around the cow to mark it as one that gets to live its life unimpeded until it dies of natural causes. Hard to say how skillful that is. It certainly sounds more skillful than dumping a bunch of invasive species into a body of water. But then if you talk to people who live in the Indian subcontinent, they might have a different view of all the cows wandering around unharmed. They might have a different take on it. But, I think that all of us are trying our best to be compassionate. I would be more worried about the person who thinks the issue is about how meritorious an act is. There are people out there that have a tendency to look at this as like a point system. Like, there are students in Hogwarts and they have merits and demerits, and they're trying to get the points at the end of the game or at the end of the semester. And there's that sense of that, that they can be a businessman that does all this shady stuff, kind of the Wolf of Wall Street type I was talking about before, but then they can do stuff like this in a big ceremony in one act, and to them they think it balances the scales in some way, which I don't know. I think if you go about it the way some of these other stories I've read, there was another story about releasing a bunch of carp into a river, and I think a bunch of them perhaps died, things like that. Just crazy stories, a lot of stuff like that. Just these very elaborate, showy things that end up in newspapers. And like, who's really benefiting, It's more pretending to be skillful than actually being skillful in some cases.
Thank you, Subodha. Any question, any comment? Nothing?
Thank you. Thank you for the talk today. It's very practical. This is remind me about something in Vietnam. On occasion, ceremony, a Buddhist ceremony, they release fish or bird or something like that. But it happened, they, the temple, they ordered the frog, like a fish, they ordered a frog.
Mm-hmm.
And then they bring about a lot, I don't know how many kilogram, I don't know, maybe ton of them. And they dump on some small river. And when the fish, when they release the fish, and then the down the stream,
Mm-hmm.
somebody they captured them
Right.
and they sell, they bring back to the market and sell in the market.
Which kind of makes it an empty act, an empty gesture, doesn't it?
Yeah. So it's remind me when I remember, I don't know, I read somewhere, he said that when you do the compassion without the wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
can be a dumb because you don't think.
Yeah.
You think in front that you do the right thing, but end up it's do the wrong thing. But when you have the wisdom, the compassion you develop along with that. So I believe that.
Yeah, that's, I mean, you make a solid case for why we develop wisdom and discernment, because it helps us differentiate from acts that look compassionate as opposed to the ones that actually are compassionate. And we might get suckered into the things that are very showy and look very compassionate, but are actually quite callous. We don't think about what happens the day after, or later that day even. Yeah.
So I know some brand of the Buddhist, they emphasize too much about compassion, but they don't they don't think about the wisdom. So that's why they do a lot of things. And over here in LA, in the old days, somebody released fish or turtle at the Echo Park
Mm-hmm.
lake, and those things they harm the fish already there.
Yeah. That also happens in China, by the way. They get a bunch of red ear slider turtles from the United States and release them into China as an invasive species that harm the local turtles. But it's supposedly meritorious and compassionate act. Yeah.
Yeah, I learned about that, and you see sometimes we think that we do the right thing, but come out the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And so they think about a good karma, but for me, I learned about the karma is not easy, like subtract from one to this one or anything, but they're very delicate. I don't know. I feel I learn about it. The karma
Yeah.
is something is not like the people say, oh, there's a karma. No.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the way I learn.
Yeah.
So a little bit.
No, I agree with you. Yeah.
So, but thank you very much. This is a very practical subject, Dhamma talk, and I hope the audience they can learn something about you, your giving talk, and will be benefit on their practice.
Thank you, Dom.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nam. I think we can chant right now, page 4 and page 10. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham saranam gacchami. Dhammam saranam gacchami. Sangham saranam gacchami. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them all.
deluding passions are inexhaustible.
I vow to sin them all.
Dharma gates are limitless.
I vow
to study them
them
all. Buddha's way is supreme. I vow to attain it. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and the sick find health relief. Nguyện nhi tự công đức phổ cập nhớ thế đặng tự chân sanh giải con thái phật đạo. Nguyện nhi tự công đức phổ cập nhớ thế đặng tự chân sanh giải con thái phật đạo. Nguyện nhi tự công đức phổ cập nhớ thế đặng tự chân sanh giải con thái phật đạo.
Thank you for everybody. Thank you, Subodha. It's a nice, wonderful talk. And next Sunday we're going to celebrate the Vesak, which is Buddha's birth, enlightenment, and passing away. So we have 10 monks coming for the service, and we have dana, and we have lunch for everybody. Please come and join 19 of the coming Sunday for the Vesak celebration.
Next Sunday.
Yeah,
Yes.
next week.
Next week, coming Sunday, 19th. Thank you again. I think, Sansara, we have tea. Yes, we have tea and cookies. Thank you for everybody.